You're listening to Psych with Mike. If you enjoy the show, then help us out. Go to Apple Podcasts and rate us and leave us a comment. That is so beneficial for the show, and we would really, really appreciate it. But in addition to that, you can follow us on Twitter at Psych with Mike. You can like the Facebook page at Psych with Mike. And now you can even catch us on TikTok at Psych with Mike. So please subscribe to all of those different ways to stay connected to the show. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.
If you were a Boy Scout, I'd say be prepared.
Okay. They went out of business.
Because they weren't prepared.
Yeah. Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Good morning.
You look really nice today.
Thank you.
And for people who aren't seeing you on camera, they don't know how nice you look. It's their loss.
It is.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I'm stunned.
Why do you look so nice?
My wife dressed me today.
That wasn't the story you told me earlier.
Yeah, well.
You're not going to tell that
No.
story? Oh, okay.
Not
All right.
going there.
All right. Well, then no, people will never know. They'll just be curious.
And that's what killed the cat.
That is what killed the cat. Although it's not what killed Schrodinger's cat. Cyanide killed that cat.
I'm not sure the cat was there.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Unless you open the box, you don't know.
Exactly.
And if you don't know what we're talking about, then that's bad radio.
Then open your Google. Yeah.
So,
I have a face for radio.
do you? Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I've been told that I have a face for radio. Mm-hmm. I guess it's good that, well, we do video these, so people can watch them on the YouTubes. I actually was talking to somebody last night that you had originally sent to me, and they ask about you all the time, and I don't even know, at the end somehow it got brought up about the podcast, and he was like, oh, I still need to do that. And I'm like, well, you can get on it anytime. And and he's like, do you do that on the YouTubes? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I think he was missing you, and he wanted to.
I can understand.
He could hear and see.
I miss myself sometimes.
Yeah. So that was nice.
Yeah, it's always flattering when people think kindly of you.
Exactly.
Remember.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and for years afterwards. I mean, you have students that still remember you.
God, I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do. Yeah, I periodically get calls or letters from former students.
And I told you that my son passed his certification exam this week, so he is now a certified teacher.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. He is very educated for a junior high school teacher.
He has
two master's degrees.
I don't know if that's a true statement, Michael. I know a lot of high school and junior high school teachers that are exceptionally well educated.
No, I'm not. Yes, of course, that's true. I'm not
casting any aspersions?
No, I'm saying that when he was in undergraduate, I encouraged him to pursue his passions, which was history and education, and he did that, and then he would run back into psychology, and then he'd go back into education. He did this like 3 times,
right.
And then got a master's degree in counseling, has never gotten licensed, never once counseled anybody, and now he's back in education where he belongs, because that's what he loves.
And he'll be able to use all that education. It's never wasted.
They love the fact that he has a counseling degree.
Of course they do.
Yeah. So it's all turned out well.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm happy for him.
So we have probably talked about this topic a number of times, but I don't think that we can talk enough about it because it's both relevant in society and something that a lot of people don't understand, and that is the differences and the similarities between depression and anxiety.
Well, and part of the understanding needs to be that they're comorbid. They're regularly comorbid, but tend to present one facet. So if you present with depression, there may be anxiety underneath it, and if your depression gets better, then the anxiety will surface. Or if you present with anxiety, there may be depression underneath that will surface once you get the anxiety under control.
Right.
And they get really frustrated if that happens, which they have every right to. It's very frustrating. But it's hard to know what is going on and how to respond in helpful ways as a therapist, as a clinician. How do I help somebody that is depressed? And I think we've talked about that much more than we've talked about anxiety, distress, or somebody that's suffering from pretty high incapacitating levels of anxiety. How do you help them? I mean, we know all kinds of strategies and techniques that have been recommended or written about, but you have to get in a room with somebody and create a safe holding environment so that they can process what they are feeling in a safe way with some support from you and encouragement from you, and learn that they can live through it, that it isn't going to kill them. If they start crying, they're not going to cry forever. If they start having a panic attack, they're not going to have a heart attack and die. And then start processing what the emotional awareness is that they have, and start thinking about the triggers. What's going on in your life that is causing you to be depressed or causing you to have anxiety? There's always a possibility that it's biochemical, but it's more likely to be emotional and circumstantial. The stress levels that the average American lives with in today's world are phenomenally high. And a typical response to that level of stress is some form of anxiety, some form of depression.
So this is actually what my dissertation was on. So I have a lot of ideas about...
I could see it flashing in your eyes.
this whole thing. And so it wasn't originally what my dissertation was on. Originally, I was writing my dissertation on substance abuse as an attachment disorder, and
that was too depressing, and you had too much anxiety.
No, I got 1/3 of the way through, and my committee met, and they said, "Oh, we think all of your research is really old, and we don't like it, so start over."
Yeah.
And so I had to start over, and so then I knew that I could get lots of up-to-date, relevant research on anxiety and depression. So then that was what I did, and so for me, I have a very fixed kind of conceptualization of those two disorders, and I wonder if people do, or if they just say by the seat of their pants, "Oh, I think that's depression," or "Oh, I think that's anxiety."
Are you talking about clinicians, or are you talking about just ordinary people?
I'm talking about everybody. I think that ordinary people certainly do,
yes.
And I wonder how many clinicians really have a defined understanding of what they think the differences in those disorders are, because how do you make a differential diagnosis if you don't have a defined understanding?
You get out the DSM and start looking at each of the possibilities and check the criterion list and make an assessment.
And the symptoms, though, are hugely overlapping,
right,
for depression and
Some
anxiety. And so then for me, the question, when I was doing my research, the question was, how do you really define these things? And for me, what I came to see, both through the literature and also then anecdotally through my own practice, was that depression can be, may not always be, but can be biochemical in nature, and anxiety really can't be. So anxiety has to be, we don't treat anxiety with medications that are actually designed to fix a biochemistry imbalance because of the anxiety, like we do with depression. So we give people serotonin-specific reuptake inhibitors or serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors for their depression because they're neurotransmitter imbalances. We give people benzodiazepines for anxiety, which is really the same mechanism of action as alcohol, so it sedates the nervous system so the person doesn't feel as anxious, but doesn't actually address any chemical imbalance based on the anxiety. And so for me, depression can be biochemical. It can also be emotional, as you said. But anxiety is a thought disorder that is produced by cognitive dissonance, so the inability for the human brain to hold two conflicting thoughts simultaneously, and then that causes what we experience as anxiety. And so the way that you go about, for me, the way that you go about treating those things is radically different. With depression, if somebody is not getting out of bed, right, they're not showering, they're not doing their ADLs, which are activities of daily living, then the first thing that I do, and I don't know if you do the same thing, is to say, let's find something, even the smallest thing, that you could do that would change that behavior up, that would then you could hang your hat on and say, okay, I did that today, and then the next day you can do something that's a little bit more, and you try and string those behaviors along until the person is more functional,
right,
and they're out of their depression. With anxiety, I'm really trying to identify what are the thoughts that you're getting caught up on, and can we reframe those and create a difference in perception so that now your anxiety is somewhat alleviated.
Yeah, I think the process for treating depression is to say, we need to get you moving.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't feel better or don't want to take a shower or get dressed, if you do,
mm-hmm,
the act of moving has a very great potential to change your chemistry,
right,
so that you aren't as depressed.
Right.
Whereas with anxiety, you're trying to identify the thoughts so that they can, especially if you're using cognitive behavioral approach, how can I control my thinking? How can I modify my thinking to quiet down this anxiety? And there are some physical processes for that as well, like deep breathing,
mm-hmm,
that help. But ideally, I mean, substantially, you try to change the thought patterns.
Yeah. And
what's the script that you hear in your head?
Right. The deep breathing is super, super beneficial, because when you get anxious, you're activating your sympathetic nervous
Everything
system.
tightens up,
Yeah.
and you can't breathe.
Right.
I know clinically, very regularly, when people are in the depths of despair, what I would say is, I need you to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to breathe with your chest, not your mouth.
Yeah.
You know, stretch your chest muscles,
mm-hmm,
and breathe with me. Take a deep breath with me, hold it, blow it all out.
mm-hmm,
Just listen to my voice and breathe with me. And we'll get over the hump. And then we can go back and say, so what was going on? What were we talking about? What were you feeling when you locked up?
mm-hmm,
And it may lock up again. And then you get them to breathe out of it. But eventually they can start to talk about it, because what I am learning still at this stage is that process awareness
mm-hmm,
is the critical step. I remember years ago, I used to teach classes in counseling, and what I would tell my students, whenever you get lost as a therapist, you're sitting in the room with somebody, they're having some high level of emotional distress, however that's manifesting as depression or a panic attack or whatever it is, and you don't know what to do, you don't know what to say next, just do process awareness.
mm-hmm.
Whenever you are in your head and thinking, then you're not doing good therapy.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to do both.
Mm-hmm.
You have to work on both tangents. Think about what's going on, but be present in the room physically and help the client be present in the room physically. So you do process awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, in this moment, this is how I'm experiencing you. I see that your jaw muscle is flinching. I see that you're not breathing deeply. I see that your fingers are tapping on the chair. You know, are you aware of that? Am I understanding? And is this an accurate take on how you're doing? And you help them focus on those things, then they can begin to change those things.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like biofeedback.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I find out that, remember when biofeedback equipment first started being available?
Oh yeah.
You know, and people would make a little yellow dot bounce from line to line to line just by looking at it and thinking
mm-hmm,
about it. You can tell them, that's what I'd like you to be able to do, and they're able to do it. I mean, it's magic.
mm-hmm.
But the same thing is part of the process awareness. You bring that into your consciousness and your immediate perception, you can make some changes.
So I've a lot of times I'll do deep breathing with people, and I'll have them put a hand on their chest and
mm-hmm,
a hand on their belly, because you
mm-hmm,
want to breathe deep into that belly.
Right.
Because a lot of times we're conditioned to breathe shallowly because we sit. Right. And we're very sedentary.
Crunch that up.
Yeah, and so you can't breathe into your
sometimes
abdomen.
You have them lay down.
And if they can't even breathe into their abdomens sitting up, then you do have them lay down, and you train them to be able to feel what that's like, to be able to expand that lung capacity mm-hmm, as deep as possible, because a lot of people don't even know how to do that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then once you show them how to do that, I mean, you can't breathe deeply for 2 minutes and not feel better. It's almost physiologically impossible.
Yeah.
But people don't routinely practice it, and so then after you do that with them for a little bit of time and they start to recognize that physiologically that's having an impact, a light goes off. It's like, wow,
Well,
I can actually control this.
And it's easier to do with people that are public speakers or singers that have already learned some things about breath control. You know, to be able to finish your sentence or your quotation or the lyrics in a song in the correct rhythm requires you to be able to breathe properly, which is why a lot of stutterers as speakers are good singers. Mel Tillis had a stuttering problem.
Right.
When he was talking, he never stuttered when he was singing.
I did not. I mean, I knew that he didn't. I didn't know that that was why.
Yeah, because of the breath control.
All right, let's go to our first break, and we will be back in just a second.
All right.
If you like Psych with Mike, here's a couple of ways that you can really help us out. You could subscribe to the show on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok at Psych with Mike. But the two things that would really, really help us out is subscribing to us on YouTube, search Psych with Mike, but also going to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a review and a comment. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.
All right, we are back, and you were talking about that breath control. One of the ways where I really started to practice this was when I learned how to scuba dive, and the way that you control where you are in the water when you're scuba diving is by how much air you have in your lungs. And so if you're really, really good at controlling your buoyancy, those guys only do that through breathing. They don't kick and flail their arms about. They're just in how they control the amount of oxygen that's in their lungs. They can move up and down in the water column, so they can go along a coral reef and like an elevator, go down and go up and without moving a muscle.
Wow.
And it's amazing how you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's really so much of a lost art. There's so much about breathing, and even you and I who have been doing this for a long time, and we really think about this kind of thing, and we want to help people to learn how to be able to breathe deeply. I feel like I still only know.
Well, I think it's
just
a
the
natural
surface.
reaction when you are flooded with emotional distress. It is a common thing to try to squeeze everything down, try to control it and force it to stop. And so you hold your breath, you tighten up your muscles, you clench your jaw, you squeeze your fist if you can, because you're trying through willpower to shut off the runaway train.
Yeah.
And if somebody says, "Well, I need you to breathe," you're like, "Yeah, I got some words for you too."
Yeah.
When I can open my mouth and say them, because right now I'm biting my tongue.
Right.
But I think that's a very typical response. And as the clinician, when you see someone manifest that response, then you make that intervention and you say, I need you to breathe. I need you to relax your chest muscles. I need you to open your... I mean, I remember there was an activity that was very popular in therapy circles about 15, 20 years ago, of having somebody like 10 times in a row squeeze their facial muscles, their eyes, their mouth, their jaws as tightly as they can, and then open them up as wide as they can, like one after the other, 10 times, just to force them to relax those muscles and to have that experience of recognizing the difference between grimacing, not smiling, smiling, being relaxed, being open. And people would laugh about it. I can't believe I'm paying you money to have me do this. I look stupid.
But you're getting better.
Exactly. Hello. Yeah.
So let me know if you would agree with this, if you would add something to it, take something away from it. Then what I think that we are saying is that with depression, our intervention is designed to get you moving,
Yes.
and with anxiety, it's designed to get you slowed down.
Yes. In the short form. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that is, if I were talking to another person who was either
But the distinction,
Yeah.
slowing down in your thought processes because of the anxiety spikes them, but also slowing down in terms of your body's behaviors.
Exactly.
Slow the way you breathe, slow your heartbeat, stretch your muscles out,
Right.
let them relax. All of that combined is a way that you try to fight anxiety.
Because when you're activating that sympathetic nervous system, you're just dumping adrenaline into the system in overdrive, and it's got you all
nowhere to go.
up.
It just locks you up.
Yeah. So with the depression, we're trying to get people moving. With the anxiety, we're trying to get people to slow down. So if I was talking to either a therapist who was asking, how do I make that differential diagnosis, or I was talking to somebody who was in training, that's what I would be saying to them is, when in that process awareness, like you were talking about earlier, which is so important, just try and sit with that and ask yourself, with your empathetic response system, does this person feel like that they're slowed down, or do they feel like they're speeded up?
Well, sometimes you ask them, please match my breathing. And sometimes the way you can make that intervention is you match their breathing, and then you modify yours. And when you're sitting 2 feet from them, looking face to face, and they're hyperventilating, you start, and then you start calming down, and calming down your breathing, and they will mirror you. It's a kinesthetic dance of mirroring. And you can see it happen. You can point it out. Look, you're slowing down. Look at what you're doing. You cross your legs, I cross mine. It's funny.
Yeah. Now, the one place where that breaks down, where this rule of thumb, depression is about slowing down, anxiety is about speeding up, is especially with adolescent males, so it can happen anywhere, but especially with adolescent males, depression will oftentimes manifest as irritation. So they'll be angry, and they'll express that through behaviors that are associated with anger, which when you look at it on the surface may look like that they are anxious, that they're experiencing anxiety, when really they're experiencing depression.
And that is the benefit of having an ongoing relationship. You have to have more than one opportunity to make an assessment. And you can't just come in and have an immediate label and here's a package of responses for this label, so thank you and goodbye. You have to build the relationship. You have to spend the time. You have to do the work.
And with those adolescent males, you and I ended up spending a lot of our careers working with adolescent males because we're male, and in the practice that we were in, there weren't a lot of people that wanted to work with those individuals, and we had a lot of them coming in. And so we kind of built our business doing that. And for me, when I experienced them in expressing that irritability, but knowing that it was an underlying depression, for me, that almost always came down to some kind of insecurity. They were insecure about
or
something.
Frustration. I can validate your frustration. You live in a crazy household. Your mom's crazy as hell, but you have to live there. Your parents are doing bizarre things, and you're acting out and getting in trouble as a way to pull attention on the family and trying to make it change. They're not going to change. So let's change you, because you have to live here for another year or 2 or 3 or 4 to have an opportunity to have a successful life. I mean, you don't want to go be a homeless person on the street. You have to live within these circumstances. So let's change the way you process that and experience that so that you can do that. And quit trying to create enough upheaval in the family that they have an epiphany. Oh my God, we're crazy. We need to do this, because that's not going to happen.
But I always still conceptualize that as coming from a place of insecurity, because those individuals, they live in those chaotic families. When they're young, that all makes sense, because that's all they know. And then they get to be adolescents, they start moving out into the larger world, and they figure out,
don't live that way.
They don't live that way.
So what's wrong here?
It's insane. And then you're right, they're trying to get somehow create an environment where the family will correct.
So it becomes important in what are their social messaging outlets. What models do they see about the way that men respond? Men respond to women. Men respond to stress. Men respond to frustration. And if your source of imagery is negative, some of the music that they listen to is really aggressive, really violent, really negative. The role models are outlaws, gangsta, rap, a particular division of rap. They're not going to be able to internalize adequate or appropriate response systems that they need as adult males. And then, if you have access to the parents, then you say, okay, Dad, let's talk about what you do and how you model frustration, anger, irritation, And do you teach it? Do you show it, or do you just preach it?
Right.
And so many of those dads are like, "Do what I say, not what I do."
Yeah,
and that's what they learned growing up.
Right, and that's what I was going to say is that even if you have access to the parents, a lot of times you're not going to get that system to change any more than the child's going to get the system to change.
I remember one time I had a family they bringing their adolescent male to me because he was really acting out and in a lot of trouble. And I worked with him for a while, and he was frustrated as he could be because he wanted his father's attention and he couldn't get it, except when he was in trouble, when he was in a crisis. And his father was a very busy executive, very wealthy, powerful man. And I asked to meet with him, and he agreed to come in one time.
One time.
Well, I had to interrupt his schedule, but he wanted to know what the hell I wanted to know with him. And I had a conversation with him about, this is contributing to your son's distress, and I have some recommendations about spending time with your son. And he said, I don't have time for this. I will write you a check. You spend time with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, I got to go. I never saw him again.
Yeah. And then you're in the position of creating that role model for that adolescent. And that's the one thing that I really try and be very, very cognizant of when I'm working, especially with those young adolescents, is being able to be very, very consistent so that they can see that. Now,
oh, absolutely.
It may or it may not help. It may or it may not help in that context, right? So it may not help in the time in which he's coming to see me, but maybe it plants a seed,
right, that
the child is able to carry with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't change overnight. Nobody does.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we're in agreement then that that depression is about people are slowing down. We want to try and get them moving. Anxiety is about people are speeding up, at least, thought-wise, and we're trying to get that to slow down a little bit.
But either of those can arise from the same set of circumstances.
And that's what I was going to
say. If I feel trapped, if I feel powerless, if I feel helpless, if I feel the pressure of performance and have performance anxiety, I can respond with being depressed, being flat, having no affect, or I can vibrate out of control with anxiety, burst into tears, burst into rage, throw my keys against the wall, whatever, punch a wall. And so then I'm in trouble for that, and don't really know why that happened. And people say, why'd you do that? I don't know. It just flew over me.
Right. And so, the message then to the people who are out there practicing or who are learning how to practice, or if you've been in this cycle for a while and you're wondering why, if, you go to somebody and they say, oh, looks like you're anxious, we're going to treat your anxiety, and you feel like there's been some success with that, but it just keeps happening over and over again, it could be, like you're saying, depression that's manifesting, right. And you have to figure out what is really that underlying issue.
Yeah. And it's different when you're working with adolescents because they're players in their own right. They have their own agendas, they have their own power system, they have their own motivation that's within the family triangle, but isn't the family triangle. So you have to recognize that, and then there are ethical boundary lines that you have to draw. You have to have conversations with the parents, because as the parent, I'm paying the bill and I have the right of information for what's going on with my child. You have to be able to tell me. But you have to negotiate where those limits are to say, because you have to be honest. You have to validate what you hear from the kid. And so if the kid says, my parents make me crazy, and I'm going to run away from home. I'm going to be suicidal. Well, if he's going to be suicidal or run away from home, then you have to let the parents know, or you have to let the system know. And you tell them, I got to tell. I remember one time I was seeing a young girl that was depressed, had moved here recently from another state. It was not making any friends. Her parents brought her in. They were concerned, and one day she came in with a notebook. It was a journal that she was taking, and some paragraphs were underlined, and she didn't say anything about it. She just had it in her hands, and I was talking to her, and she was saying, no, nothing's going on, nothing's happening, and I just don't like it here, nobody likes me, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you brought that in today, and you never brought it in before. Is there something in there that you want to share with me? And she said, well, I don't care. And I said, well,
right. I don't care.
can I look at it? And she said, yeah. And so I looked at it, and she had written that she stayed awake a lot of nights standing next to her parents' bed with a butcher knife thinking about killing them. And she'd written it down. And I said, you wrote this? And she said, yeah. I said,
Did
you know
you do
what's
it?
in it?
Yeah.
And she said, yeah. I said, did you want me to know what's in it? And she said, well, I don't care. I said, well, now that I have this, I have to talk to your parents and tell them what's going on. Well, I don't care. So called the parents in. I said, I want to talk to them without you. Will you stay in the room, in the other room? And she's like, yeah. I said, you won't run away? And she, no. And so I called the parents in and showed them the journal, talked to them about what was going on, how I understood it, what I thought needed to happen. And the parents looked at me and said, we don't know you. This is just like our third visit with you. We were recommended to you by the school. But, we were in counseling in the other state, and that counselor just said this is a developmental issue and she'll grow out of it. So we think we're just going to quit. And they did. They quit. And I didn't see them again.
Yep. That's sad.
I mean, I ultimately know what happened, but that's a story for another day.
So hopefully that was helpful for people. And as always, we would love it if you would go to the internets, look us up on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts, give us a comment and like the show. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.